We are learning more tonight about Michael Flynn, the president's former national security advisor. Back with me, Matthew Rojansky, Jack Kingston, Juliette Kayyem, and Steve Hall. So, Congressman Kingston, let's talk about Michael Flynn. He was fired for lying to the vice president about his connection with the Russian ambassador, and now we have learned that he was working as a foreign agent for Turkey, paid more than $500,000 while he was working for the Trump campaign, and he just filed paperwork to make that official 2 days ago. It seems like that would have been important information for the American people to know, don't you think?
I think it would have been, but remember, he was fired not because of his connection with Russia, but because he lied about his conversation with Russia, not because he lied about his connection with Russia. And that was the conversation in which he said he did not bring up sanctions. Later, it was shown that he did. And by the way, that was probably illegal to have him as a private citizen. That he was collateral damage, you might say, and that was illegally leaked. But nonetheless, he did mislead the vice president about it, and that's why he was fired. But, you know, I do think that scrutiny in terms of who have you been working for, who do you have connections with, I think that's all fair game for the president's staff, and that's just part of the scrutiny and transparency of public office.
Does it sound like he was extremely vetted?
It does not. And I think that everybody else has been and everybody else will be. Lessons learned. You know, one of the things, Don, about Trump coming as a businessman, he doesn't try to rig things. And I'm not making I'm not trying to go back to the election on that use of that word. But one of the things I know when I was in the House is that often we knew exactly what the votes would be on amendments before we brought it to the floor because we wanted to win every time. And that's the political way to do things. I think a businessman's way is, hey, I'm not going to have perfect. I'm going to try some things, and some things are going to fail. I'm not afraid to make mistakes. Well, I'm talking about with some of his appointees, with Mr. Flynn, but also the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of Air Force, our Navy, who's had to
I think that's okay, Jack.
nomination.
Listen, I don't mean to cut you off, and I don't want to be rude. I think that's okay when you're working in private business for yourself. You can handle your business the way you want to. When you're the President of the United States, you're doing the American people's business, and especially when you say that people should be extremely vetted and that you're going to have the best team and do the best job, then you need to do that and not run it as a private corporation. That's not what the U.S. government is. Go ahead, Juliette. I know you wanted to get in.
Oh, Don. Yeah, well, I talked to a bunch of people who know this law a little bit better than I do in terms of, you know, what was Flynn's obligation. That's a lot of money to forget, $500,000. He clearly, either forgot it or there's just a casualness about ethics, I would say, around Trump and his people. But the more interesting thing is, why did he decide to do it now? And most lawyers who know this law suspect that the FBI that he's cleaning up his house, that he has lawyers that are saying, you need to get your house in order. It's like paying back taxes when you're about to be nominated for something.
Flynn.
If you've been skipping out on taxes. Talking about Flynn, that the reason why he did it now, why he's out of the limelight, he doesn't have the job, is actually because he needs to clean up his backgrounds because either there's an investigation or things are ongoing. We've long suspected that Flynn is part of all this Russia stuff. And so the timing has to be discussed. Why all of a sudden does he wake up and say, oh, I forgot that I was an agent of a foreign power? And so likely, at least people who have this experience, people who come forward, it's like paying your back taxes before you get nominated.
Well, the whole thing about the wiretap or communications, it was because of Flynn. He was speaking to the Russian ambassador, and he happened to be picked up from them monitoring the Russian ambassador. You were nodding your head as she was speaking, Matthew. Why so?
Well, look, the whole notion of the conversations with the Russians being so sensitive, so much so that someone could get fired, it's a little strange. It's clearly the lying that's a problem, and it's clearly, ethics vulnerabilities within the administration that be the problem. Talking to the Russians and having a policy towards the Russians are smart things to do, both for diplomacy and during a campaign. I mean, Hillary Clinton had a Russia team. So what you would have wanted backstopping Flynn and anyone else senior in the administration who's going to have contacts with the Russians or anybody else after January 20th is a policy and people to execute that policy. And I think part of the problem with Flynn was he really was very much out there on his own. Yeah. He was freelancing, he was having conversations, and he wasn't being well briefed.
Here's a question, Steve. I mean, we know that Flynn was paid to speak at an RT conference in 2015. He sat with Vladimir Putin at the event. If he was working on behalf of Turkey during the campaign, is it conceivable that he could have been working for Russia too?
Well, first, let's get to the idea of this extreme vetting, which you were talking about. How about extreme common sense? I have to agree. The conversations with Kislyak are probably not that big of an issue. He probably just got a little bit ahead of himself and then ended up lying about it, which didn't end up well for him. And of course, there was the integrity issue. But when you go to Russia, as a intelligence officer, this guy was an intelligence officer for most of his career, and seems somehow to think that it's okay to go to Russia, it's okay to sit next to Vladimir Putin, which doesn't happen by accident. It's okay to get paid and associate with RT, which is a propaganda outlet of the Kremlin. I mean, how do you miss that? How do you figure, yeah, this is the guy who I want, to be doing this? It just, that to me doesn't make a lot of sense. Could he have been working, for the Russians as well? I would have been. I was asked recently, if you had that, that magical spy, that great penetration inside the Kremlin, what would you ask? One of my questions would be, what actually happened, in Moscow when he was there with RT that was off camera, that was not taken pictures of? Were there private meetings? We don't know. We just don't know about that. But now that the stuff with regard to Turkey is coming out, I mean, it's just difficult to tell. We don't know.
Thank you, everyone. Up next, President Trump's pick to be his ambassador to Russia was a fierce critic during the campaign.